My father-in-law looked me dead in the eyes and said I should be grateful they let me sleep in their garage. I was holding his grandchild, his blood, but that didn't matter. Then my dad spotted me limping with my baby on my hip. He froze. "Why are you walking? Where's your car?" I said. "His mom took it," said I'm late. "They let me stay. My dad just said, get in the car. We're fixing this tonight." What happened next changed everything. I climbed into his truck, the worn leather seat feeling like heaven compared to my cot. 3 months ago, I moved into the Brennan estate to save money, while Tyler was deployed. Phyllis promised 3 empty bedrooms and family support. Instead, she pointed me toward the detached garage next to the lawnmower. It was unfinished storage with a space heater that barely fought off the damp chill. I spent my nights inhaling gasoline fumes and listening to Lily cough in the freezing air. The throbbing in my left ankle was a constant, sharp reminder of my mistake. 2 weeks ago, Gerald decided I needed to earn my keep by cleaning the second-story gutters. The ladder slipped, and I came down hard. Snapping something deep inside the joint. Phyllis heard my scream but didn't call a doctor. She told me to walk it off because X-rays were too expensive. I had been hobbling on a purple, swollen foot ever since, praying it wasn't permanently broken. I hadn't told my dad anything, because the shame was heavier than the groceries I was carrying. But Patrick O'Connell has an instinct for trouble. He had driven 200 miles just to surprise his granddaughter for her 8-month birthday. He pulled up right as I was dragging my bad leg across the manicured gravel, struggling to balance the baby and the cheap formula I bought with my $40 allowance. He didn't see a guest. He saw a prisoner. I expected him to storm the front door and tear Gerald apart with his bare hands. Patrick spent 35 years in construction dealing with job site bullies, and he knew how to fight. But he didn't scream. His face went through a terrifying cycle of confusion, rage, and finally, a cold, deadly calm. It was the quiet before a hurricane makes landfall. He looked at the mansion, then at my bruised ankle, and I saw the exact moment he decided on war. I buckled Lily into the back seat, her tiny hands clutching my shirt. My dad didn't even look at the house as he put the truck in gear. He just asked if I had my ID and the baby's bag. I nodded, tears finally spilling over my cheeks. We drove past the iron gates and the perfectly trimmed hedges that hid their ugly secrets. I was safe now, but as I looked at my dad's white, knuckled grip on the wheel, I knew the Brennans were done. We stopped at a diner 3 towns over, where the coffee tasted like burnt hazelnuts, and the vinyl seats were cracked. Dad chose a booth in the back corner, facing the door. He said he didn't want anyone reporting back to the Brennans, which sounded paranoid until I remembered the look in Gerald's eyes. I ordered a grilled cheese, my hands shaking so bad I had to sit on them. Dad didn't eat. He just watched the parking lot, guarding us like a sentry on duty, while I devoured the first hot meal I'd had in weeks. The silence broke when he asked about the money. I told him everything, the words spilling out like water from a broken pipe. I explained the weekly $40 allowance for me and the baby, barely enough for formula. I told him about skipping meals so Lily wouldn't starve, and how Phyllis monitored my receipts. Dad listened without interrupting, but his knuckles turned white against his coffee cup. He didn't yell or slam the table. He just pulled out his wallet, dropped a 20 for the bill, and said we were going to the copy center. The copy center at 11 at night is a strange, fluorescent purgatory. A guy in a bathrobe was making copies near the front, but Dad marched us straight to the computer rental station. He paid for 2 hours of internet access and pulled up a chair next to me. "Log in," he said gently. "We need to know the damage." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I hadn't seen our bank account in 3 months because Gerald claimed he was managing it for safety. I typed my password, terrified of what the screen would show. The numbers on the screen didn't make sense at first. Tyler and I had saved $47,000 for a down payment on a starter home. It was our future, scraped together from deployment bonuses and overtime pay. But the balance in the savings account read $8,200. My stomach dropped through the floor. Nearly $39,000 had vanished in 90 days. I felt like I couldn't breathe, the room spinning around me. Dad didn't gasp. He just pointed at the transaction history tab. "Print it," he ordered. The printer whirred, spitting out page after page of betrayal. We traced the bleeding instantly. $15,000 went to BB Holdings, LLC, which Dad quickly identified as Brookett's Crystal, selling business on Instagram. Another $8,000 was withdrawn in cash, matching the dates of Phyllis's salon appointments and shopping trips. They had been draining us dry to fund their fantasy life. Phyllis bought designer handbags while I was washing diapers in a garage sink. I felt sick, physically ill, looking at the evidence of their greed. Then we clicked on the credit card tab, and the horror deepened. There were dozens of recent charges on Tyler's card: restaurant meals, expensive bar tabs, and green fees at the local country club. All local charges. All made while Tyler was sleeping in a barracks 6,000 miles away in Germany. Gerald wasn't just stealing our savings. He was living a high life using his son's identity. This wasn't just family cruelty anymore. Dad leaned back, his eyes hard and cold. "This is federal identity theft," he whispered. He picked up the stack of warm paper, his hands steady. He told me he had seen mob accounting that was more subtle than this. The Brennans were so arrogant they hadn't even tried to hide the trail. Assuming I would never check, they were wrong. Dad reached for his phone, scrolling past his usual contacts. He wasn't calling a lawyer yet. He was calling Marian, a retired paralegal who owed him a favor. "They didn't just break your trust, Paisley," he said. "They broke the law." Maureen Walsh arrived 20 minutes later wearing fuzzy pink slippers and a Michigan sweatshirt. She looked like a grandmother arriving to bake cookies, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. She didn't say hello. She just grabbed the stack of warm paper and started reading. I shifted in my chair, my ankle throbbing against the metal leg. Maureen flipped a page, frowned, and pulled a red pen from her pocket. She circled a transaction with an aggressive, scratching stroke that tore the paper. "Sloppy," she muttered. "They didn't even try to layer the transfers." She looked at me, her face softening for a second before hardening again. She asked if I signed anything when I moved in. I nodded, remembering the stack of papers Phyllis shoved at me while Lily was screaming. Insurance forms, Phyllis had called them. Emergency contacts. I was exhausted and desperate to please. I signed everything without reading a single word. Maureen sighed, but she kept writing notes in the margins. Maureen explained the trap. Hidden in that stack was likely a limited power of attorney. That was how Gerald got his name on our joint account without tripping bank security. My heart sank into my stomach. If I signed it, was it legal? Technically. Yes, Maureen said, tapping the table with her pen. But using it to fund a crystal business and country club fees. That is embezzlement. Fiduciary duty means acting in your best interest, not buying a new boat membership. She pointed to the credit card statements next. This was the smoking gun. Power of attorney usually doesn't cover consumer credit cards unless specifically stated, and definitely not for personal enrichment. Using Tyler's card for his own golf games isn't just bad parenting, she said. It is identity theft. In Michigan, that is a felony. The word hung in the air. Felony, prison time. My in-laws weren't just mean, they were criminals. A cold relief washed over me. Dad asked what our chances were in civil court. Maureen shook her head, saying it takes years and costs money we didn't have. Then she paused, looking at the header on Tyler's bank statement. Wait. Tyler is active duty, right? I nodded. Maureen's expression changed from worried to predatory. She slammed her hand on the table, making me jump. "Forget civil court," she grinned. "The Service Members' Civil Relief Act. If they stole from a deployed soldier, the federal government gets involved." She explained that financial crimes against service members are taken extremely seriously. If Tyler reports this to his command, it triggers an immediate investigation, not a slow local police matter. Local cops might call it a family dispute, Maureen said. The military calls it predation. She started writing a list of steps on the back of a flyer. We needed Tyler on board immediately. We needed him to see these numbers and confirm he never authorized a single cent of it. That was the problem. Phyllis controlled the flow of information. She monitored my phone and had the passwords to Tyler's email. If I sent a message, she would delete it before he saw it. Dad looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight here, which meant early morning in Germany. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his ancient flip phone. "We don't use your phone," he said. "We'll go around the firewall." He scrolled to a number from decades ago. Dad dialed the number, his thumb pressing hard on the rubber keys of the flip phone. It was an international call to a logistics base in Stuttgart. He wasn't calling Tyler directly, that line was compromised. Ike. He was calling Sergeant First Class Raymond Booker, a man who owed him his life from a deployment 30 years ago. I watched Dad's face tighten as the line connected. "Ray? It's Patrick. I need a secure patch through. Urgent." The old soldier code was still fluent. The conversation was brief and terrifyingly efficient. Dad didn't explain the family drama. He just gave coordinates and a callback number. He hung up and looked at me. "Ray is finding him now. Tyler will call this phone in 10 minutes. We packed up our evidence and left the neon hum of the copy center. The night air felt different now, charged with electricity. We were no longer victims waiting to be crushed. We were an active cell operating in the dark. We drove to the Starlight Motel, a place where the vacancy sign buzzed like a dying insect. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon polish. I laid Lily on the bed, surrounding her with pillows so she wouldn't roll off. She slept peacefully, unaware her family was imploding. I sat by the window, staring at the phone on the scratched nightstand. My heart hammered against my ribs. If Tyler defended his mother, I knew my marriage was over. The phone rang at exactly 2:15 in the morning. The sound was a shrill mechanical chirp that made me jump. Dad nodded at me to answer. I picked it up, my hands trembling so bad I almost dropped it. "Hello." The voice on the other end was tinny and distant, distorted by the secure line. "Paisley." Ray said it was an emergency. "Is Lily okay?" It was Tyler. He sounded tired but alive. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding back a sob. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told him everything. I told him about the garage, the $40 a week, and the hunger cramps. I told him about the ladder, and my purple ankle that Phyllis ignored. I told him about the bank account draining, a way to buy crystals and designer purses. The words came out in a rush, desperate and raw. I stripped away every lie his mother had fed him for 3 months. I left nothing out. When I finished, the silence on the line was deafening. It stretched for 10 seconds, then 20. My chest tightened with panic. He was going to say I was exaggerating. He was going to ask why I didn't just talk to them. I braced myself for the gaslighting. Then Tyler spoke, his voice unrecognizable. "She sent me photos of you," he said quiet. "She said you were renovating the guest room. She said you were happy." The illusion had shattered. He didn't ask for bank statements. He didn't ask for proof. He just asked one question. "Is your dad with you?" I said yes. "Good?" Tyler said. The fatigue in his voice was gone, replaced by a cold, metallic edge I had never heard before. "I'm going to my commanding officer. Then I'm freezing everything." But Paisley, I want to hurt them back. He wasn't just a husband anymore. He was a soldier finding out his base had been overrun. Tyler stayed on the line while he walked to the legal office. He told us the military doesn't play games with identity theft. Once he filed the affidavit, the accounts would lock down hard. Gerald's credit card would be a useless piece of plastic within hours. But Tyler wasn't satisfied with just stopping the bleeding. He wanted them to bleed back. "I want them to feel what you felt," he said. His voice was steady, terrifyingly devoid of any mercy. We looked at the paper calendar tacked to the motel wall. Today was Saturday, Gerald's 60th birthday extravaganza. The Brennans had invited 50 people, including business partners they were desperate to impress. It was going to be a black tie garden party with catered food and enough champagne to drown a battleship. They were spending our stolen money to celebrate the thief. The injustice burned in my throat like hot acid. But then, a dark idea began to form in the silence. "Let's use it," Tyler said, reading my mind through the static. "They love a show. They love pretending we're the perfect patriot family." He proposed a surprise video call. He would beam in from Germany to wish his father a happy birthday, in front of the entire gathering. Phyllis would eat it up. She would put him on the biggest screen in the house. She would gather every single guest to watch. It would be the perfect trap. The plan had one fatal flaw. Someone had to set it up. Someone had to be inside the house to ensure the technology worked and the audience was captive. Dad looked at me, shaking his head. "I won't let you go back there, Paisley." But I knew I had to. If I didn't return, they would suspect something. They would cancel the party or hide the money. I had to be the Trojan horse. I had to smile. I told Dad I could handle it for 24 hours. I would play the submissive, beaten-down daughter-in-law one last time. "I'll tell Phyllis I was just emotional," I said. "I'll say I want to make it up to her by arranging the call." Dad didn't like it, but he saw the strategic value. He started pacing the small room, his mind shifting from protector to general. "If we do this," he said, "we need a finishing move." Dad called Maureen back immediately. He needed her detective friend, Sullivan, to pay a visit. Not for an arrest, but for an inquiry. "Timed exactly," Dad said. "He needs to knock on that door 10 minutes after Tyler starts speaking." We choreographed the destruction of the Brennan legacy down to the minute. Tyler would expose the crimes on screen, and before they could spin the narrative, the police would be standing on their porch. It was cruel. It was perfect. The sun began to bleed through the thin curtains, painting the room in gray light. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a cold knot of dread. I had to walk back into that garage. I had to look Phyllis in the eye and pretend I hadn't just plotted her demise. I kissed Lily's forehead and stood up, testing my weight on my bad ankle. It still hurt, but the pain felt different now. It wasn't suffering anymore. It was fuel. Dad dropped me off a block away to avoid suspicion. I walked the final stretch, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The house loomed ahead, white columns gleaming in the sun, hiding the rot inside. I slipped into the garage first. I had left the go bag in Dad's truck, knowing I wouldn't be staying long. I took a deep breath, plastered a fake smile on my face, and opened the door to my prison. The performance of my life started now. Phyllis was in the kitchen, aggressively arranging hydrangeas. She looked up, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Where have you been? There is so much to do." I apologized, blaming my hormones and a need for fresh air. Then I played my card. Tyler called my dad's phone. He wants to surprise Gerald with a video toast during the party. Phyllis froze, then beamed. She didn't see a son, she saw a prop. "Oh, that's wonderful," she cooed. "We must make sure the lighting is absolutely perfect for the recording." Saturday morning was a blur of servitude. Phyllis handed me a clipboard with 37 tasks, ranging from polishing silver to scrubbing the patio furniture. I moved as fast as my throbbing ankle allowed, keeping my head down. Every time I winced. Phyllis pretended not to see, focused only on the aesthetic of the event. She treated me like hired help, except help gets paid and doesn't sleep next to a lawnmower. I completed every item on that list. I needed her relaxed. I needed her confident. I needed her defenseless. Guests started arriving at 4 o'clock, filling the driveway with luxury sedans. The air filled with expensive perfume and the clinking of crystal glasses. I stood in the corner of the patio, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres I wasn't allowed to eat. These were the people Gerald wanted to impress: business partners, golf buddies, the local elite. They admired the manicured lawn and the massive house, completely unaware that the mortgage was being paid with a stolen military salary. Their admiration fed Gerald's ego like a drug. Brooke arrived late, making an entrance in a dress that cost more than my first car. She kissed her parents on the cheek, acting the part of the doting daughter. I watched her laugh, knowing her boutique was nothing but a funnel for my husband's savings. She spotted me and offered a pitiful little wave, the kind you give to a stray dog. "You look tired, Paisley," she said loud enough for others to hear. "Maybe you should rest in your room." She meant the garage. A silver-haired man named William, one of Gerald's investors, cornered me near the bar. He noticed my heavy limp and frowned. "Good Lord, dear, what happened to your leg?" Before I could answer, Phyllis swooped in like a hawk. "Oh, Paisley is just so clumsy." She laughed, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. Always tripping over her own feet. We tell her to be careful, but she never listens. I swallowed the scream building in my throat. I smiled and nodded, letting her dig her own grave. The sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the perfect lawn. It was time. I told Phyllis that Tyler was ready on the line. She clapped her hands, corralling everyone into the main living room. "Come inside, everyone," she announced. "My son is calling from Germany to honor his father." She made me set up the laptop connected to the 60-inch television. She adjusted the ring light, checking her reflection to ensure she looked like the grieving, supportive mother. She had no idea the camera was a Canon. 3 people squeezed into the living room, a sea of silk and wool suits. The air grew warm and stuffy. Gerald stood front and center, holding a glass of champagne. His chest puffed out. He looked like a king surveying his subjects, confident in his untouchable status. I stood off to the side, near the French doors, checking my watch. Dad texted me a single thumbs up emoji. Sullivan was in position. The trap was set. All we needed was for someone to light the fuse. I hit the connection button. The massive screen flickered to life, pixelating for a second before clarifying into a sharp image. Tyler sat in his dress blues, the medals on his chest gleaming under the harsh office lights. The room erupted in polite applause. "Happy birthday, Gerald," someone shouted. Tyler didn't smile. His face was a mask of stone, his eyes dark and unblinking. He stared directly into the camera lens, looking past the guests, straight at the man who stole his identity. The applause died down awkwardly. The silence in the room grew heavy, stretching thin like a rubber band about to snap. Phyllis smiled nervously, waving at the screen. "Tyler, honey, can you hear us?" Tyler leaned forward, his face filling the frame. "I hear you, Mom," he said, his voice booming through the surround sound speakers. "I hear everything." He didn't sound like a son wishing his dad a happy birthday. He sounded like a judge reading a death sentence. The air left the room. The show was about to begin. Tyler didn't waste time on a preamble. "I'm glad everyone is here," he said, his voice level and cold. "Because I need witnesses for what I'm about to say." He held up a piece of paper to the camera. $47,000. That is what my wife and I saved for our future home." He paused, letting the specific number hang in the stale air like smoke. 8,200. That is what is left today. The glass in Gerald's hand trembled, sending champagne sloshing over his fingers. Tyler looked directly at his sister, who was standing near the buffet table frozen in place. 15,000 went to BB Holdings. He stated clearly. Rook, your crystal business isn't funded by satisfied customers. It's funded by my combat pay. Brooke gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as 50 heads swiveled toward her. She looked for an exit, but the room was too packed. Her fake success, the boutique, the influencer lifestyle, it was all stripped away in 10 seconds. The investors in the room exchanged dark looks. And Mom? Tyler continued, shifting his gaze to Phyllis. You told me Paisley was happy. You didn't tell me you withdrew 8,000 in cash for designer bags while my wife skipped meals. The church ladies near the sofa gasped, clutching their pearls for real this time. Phyllis turned pale, her makeup standing out like war paint on a corpse. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The image of the benevolent matriarch cracked and fell to the floor. The shame in the room was palpable. Tyler wasn't finished. He dropped the heaviest bomb last, but the worst part is the credit card dad. He held up a statement to the camera lens. Steak dinners, golf fees, bar tabs, all local. All charged to me while I sleep in a barracks. He leaned in closer. That is identity theft. That is a federal crime. Gerald's face went from red to gray. His business partners took a collective step back, physically distancing themselves from a man who stole from his own soldier's son. Then Tyler pointed a virtual finger at me. You made my wife sleep in a garage next to a lawnmower. You let her walk on a broken ankle because you were too cheap to pay for a doctor. The room went dead silent. Neighbors who had seen me limping looked down at their shoes, guilt washing over them. They had believed Phyllis's lies about me being clumsy. Now they knew the truth. I stood by the door, head high, no longer the servant. I was the evidence they couldn't ignore. Phyllis finally found her voice. This is a misunderstanding, she shrieked, her composure shattering. He's stressed. The war has gotten to him. She looked around wildly for support, but found none. It's a family matter, Gerald stammered, trying to regain control. We can discuss this privately. Tyler cut him off. There is no discussion, Dad. I've already filed the police report. And I think that's the doorbell. As if on cue, a heavy, authoritative knock echoed through the house. The sound hit the room like a gunshot. Phyllis froze, her eyes darting to the hallway. I opened the front door to reveal Detective Sullivan. He stood there in a cheap suit, badge clipped to his belt, looking unimpressed by the chandelier. Gerald and Phyllis Brennan, he asked, his voice carrying into the living room. I have some questions regarding financial irregularities involving a service member. The word, irregularities, sounded polite, but the badge meant business. Gerald dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound signaling the end of his reign. The social panic was instantaneous. Guests didn't just leave, they fled. Business partners checked their phones, muttering about sudden appointments. Church friends practically climbed over furniture to avoid being associated with a police inquiry. Within 2 minutes, the living room was emptying. Tyler watched the chaos on the screen, his mission complete. I love you, Paisley, he said, his voice softening for the first time. Go with your dad. I'll be home soon. The screen went black, leaving the Brennans alone with the wreckage of their reputation. I turned to leave. Phyllis lunged at me, grabbing my arm with claws desperate to hold on to control. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed, spit flying. You ruined everything! Do you know who we are? I looked at her hand, then up at her terrified eyes. I didn't pull away. I leaned in. I know exactly who you are, I said calmly. You're a thief. I pulled my arm free, leaving her shaking in the ruins of her perfect party. I walked out the front door, past Sullivan, who was reading Gerald his rights in the foyer. The evening air tasted sweet, like rain after a long drought. Dad's truck pulled up to the curb, the engine rumbling a low, steady rhythm. I climbed in and buckled Lily into her car seat. She cooed, happy to be moving. I looked back one last time. The white columns didn't look impressive anymore. They looked like bars. I turned forward, watching the sunset paint the sky, and we drove away for good. The wheels of justice didn't just turn, they ground the Brennans into dust. 10 days after the party, Gerald and Phyllis were formally indicted on multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. The investigation revealed Gerald had been skimming from his partners for years, turning civil suits into criminal ones. The bank seized the house within a month, plastering foreclosure notices over those pretentious white columns. I drove by once to see the weeds choking the manicured lawn. The prison was finally closed. Brooke didn't escape the blast radius either. The state tax authority took a keen interest in her unregistered crystal business. When they audited the $15,000 she received from our savings, they found 0 taxes paid and a mountain of penalties. Her influencer dreams died in a pile of audit paperwork. Last I heard, she moved into a studio apartment she hates, forced to get a real job answering phones. Karma, it turns out, has a very specific sense of humor. Tyler came home 3 weeks later on emergency leave to testify. I met him at the airport, my ankle finally healed enough to stand without wincing. He looked different. Older, harder around the eyes. But when he saw me and Lily, the soldier melted away. We stood in the arrivals terminal, holding each other so tight my ribs ached. He apologized for not seeing the truth sooner. I told him he saw it when it mattered. We weren't the same couple anymore, we were survivors. We bought a small bungalow 2 hours away from his parents' old town. It doesn't have columns or a circular driveway, but the roof doesn't leak and the mortgage is in our names only. There are no guest rooms for entitled relatives. We changed our phone numbers and put a strict block on any calls from the county jail. Tyler handles the finances now, but we review every transaction together on Sundays. Trust is good, but verification is better. We learned that the hard way. The fear that used to live in my chest is gone. I spent years thinking I had to shrink myself to fit into their world, believing my working-class roots made me less than. I was wrong. It was my dad's grit that saved us, not their country club memberships. I look at Lily now, crawling across our modest living room floor, and I promise she will never beg for love or safety. We defined what family means on our own terms. Yesterday, I went to the bank alone. I opened a separate savings account that Tyler knows about but cannot access. It isn't because I don't trust him. It is because Dad taught me you always need an exit strategy. I put $50 in it, the first deposit of my own emergency fund. I am not scared of the future anymore because I am prepared for it. The Brennans thought I was weak. They forgot that soft things can still start fires.